Sometimes when we try to understand God, when we read the Bible, oh, he can be very far from loving and caring. Let's look, though, and really find a loving God. Hello, my name is Father Mike Manning. I'm coming to you with a desire for you to understand a God that I've experienced that I hope is going to bring you a great deal of comfort and joy and peace. I'm going through the chapters of a book that I've written. It's called The 15 Faces of God. What I've done is I've looked at 15 of the parables that Jesus has written and used them as ways of allowing Jesus to reach out and say, this is who my Father is. And he does it in 15 very powerful names and powerful images that come across to us that I think can change our lives. I'd like to talk to you about a face of God that sometimes is difficult for us to understand. It's the face of God that is loving. Now, there are many people who have rejected God. They don't want to have anything to do with God because someone that they love was killed in a terrible way, or their life has been turned around by something that they had no control in, and they're very angry, and they really can't understand when someone shouts out and says, oh yes, God is loving. They scoff and they say, oh, God can't really be loving. Well, I want to say to you today, especially as I'm telling you through this book that I've written in this chapter now, about how God is really loving. And I want to look through one of the more popular parables that we hear, and you've probably heard it. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, before I get into the parable, I want to ask you this question. Where do you find God? Well, right away, you're going to say, well, I guess you go to church, or you read the Bible, or you talk to a priest, or you talk to a rabbi, or you talk to a Muslim leader, or you talk to a holy person, and that's how you get God, huh? What's fascinating about this parable that we're going to be talking about, this Good Samaritan, is God gives us a really quick and easy way of getting in touch with God. You don't even have to go to church. You don't even have to run into some holy person. The real encounter with God is found wherever there are hurting people. Think about that. You know, it's not church and not all these things. And again, I'm not saying you can't find God in church. That's not my point. But Jesus is coming across with a kind of a disturbing and a pushing challenge that this loving God that we want to have in our life can be found in people that are hurting. Now, you know the story of the Good Samaritan, isn't it? Remember, this man was going from Jerusalem down to Jericho. It's about a 15-mile drive or walk, I think, of that. And he runs into some problems. There are some people that are really out to hurt him. And they come, they rob him, beat him up, and leave him naked, dead for what they think, or dying, and they leave. Well, a priest comes along. He's going down the same road that this man had been going, and he sees the man lying there in this terrible state, almost near death. What does he do? Interesting. He walks around this man. And then a Levite, who's another holy man, a man connected with the temple, he comes along and he sees this guy dying, and he walks around him too. But there's one man riding on a donkey, and he's a man called a Samaritan. Now, we're going to get into the Samaritans for just a while, but what does this Samaritan do in distinction to the priest and the Levite? He gets off his donkey, He ministers to the man. He pours oil into the wounds. He gets him on the donkey and he takes him to the nearest motel. And there, he stays with him, cares for him, and then the next day leaves money with the hotel keeper saying, if you need anything more, take care of the man. Well, interesting story, but let's kind of stop and just look at each of those characters, the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan. Who were they? Well, the priest was a man of God. He lived in the temple. And as we know from the stories of the Bible, they were people that offered sacrifice. They would offer the lambs. They would offer, as Mary and Joseph came presenting Jesus, they were poor, and so they couldn't get a lamb, but they offered a sacrifice of a dove. And the priest would be the one that would do this. The priest was a person of prayer. He was a person of great respect, and people looked to him, not only because of what he did, but also because of the way he dressed, as being very close to God. The Levites were part of a tribe. Now, these Levites were people who, in many ways, as I studied in preparation for the book, they were kind of like the helpers of the priest in many ways. They also taught, and they would clean up the temple area and work with that. But the Samaritans, it's really important. We've heard the word Samaritan many times, but who were they? Well, the understanding of who the Samaritans were goes back maybe 700 years before Jesus. 700 years before Jesus. They lived in a place up in the north. Oh, it's a little bit just south of where Jesus lived, about 10 miles south of where Jesus lived. And we read in some of the books of Judges where they were very, very successful. They were close to all the trade that was going on in the Mediterranean, and they had wealth and everything was comfortable. But then a foreign power came in. They were the Assyrians. They lived in present-day Iraq, northern Iraq. They came in and they devastated all of the world that they knew, and they came into that land of Samaria, and they conquered the area. They took many of the people off as slaves and left just a remnant there in that land. But then they took people from other countries where they had conquered them. They brought them back in. And so these Samaritans were intermarrying not with just Jews, but with people who were non-Jews. Well, after about 80 years, freedom came, and the Assyrians were conquered, and the slaves that had been taken off were allowed to return. But oh my, when they returned, they were very, very upset with these Samaritans, because they intermarried. They were not clean. They were not pure Jews. And get this, the prejudice and the hatred that the Jews of Jerusalem felt for them had a history of 700 years. Imagine that. One people hated another people for 700 years. And now Jesus tells this story. And who's the hero of the story? Well, it's not the priest, and it's not the person who's the Levite, another holy person in the eyes of the people, but it's the person who was actually, in the eyes of the Jews, a heretic. Had a different understanding of what the Bible meant, and he was wrong. And yet, look at this. Jesus raises up that person. You know what comes from all this? A very disturbing challenge from Jesus. You know what it is? A challenge of what it really means to be holy. As I said to you, it isn't necessarily, as Jesus says, the people that are in church and reading the Bible and whatnot. But if we really listen to the heart of this story, the real challenge of holiness is the willingness to be reaching out and getting into the lives of people who are hurting in our life. That's it. Those that are filled with guilt, with fear, even the rich that seem to have everything, their life can be so empty. The depressed. Oh yes, and those that are just struggling with sin and their life is just turned upside down. As we reach out and we try to find out where God is, if we reach out and serve those that are hurting, that's where we find God. Stay tuned, I'm going to come right back to you. I want to share some more of this disturbing and challenging insight into what holiness is and to what the real understanding of God as being really loving. I have written a new book and I'm excited for you to have it. It's called, get this title, 5 Seconds a Day to a Successful Marriage. I know you probably didn't hear that, but it's really 5 seconds a day to a successful marriage. I have in this book the key to allowing your marriage, if you're madly in love, to get better. If your marriage perhaps has reached a plateau and you're not growing anymore, this can bring new life and hope. And even if your marriage is really gone beyond the realm of possible joy and growth, this can be the answer to bringing new life into your marriage. I try to understand what's going on in marriages. What are some of the problems? Is it money? Is it communication? And what about 5 seconds? What does it mean, only 5 seconds? 5 seconds in our life can change our life. If a doctor comes up to you and says, "I'm sorry, you have cancer," 5 seconds, it could change the whole direction of your life. Someone walks up to you and says, "You just won the lottery." Whoa, your whole life can be changed. Or someone comes to you and says, "I love you." That can be the change. Please, I want you to have this book for yourself or perhaps for people in your life that you know that are struggling in their marriage. The title again is 5 Seconds a Day to a Successful Marriage. Look on your screen. You see all the information of how you can call in right now, or you can send for email, you can send by mail. And please, for only $8 or more if you can, this book can be yours. And believe me, in 5 seconds, your life will be changed. I'm coming to you today with a challenge of making sure that you understand that God is loving. And what we're doing is we're looking at that wonderful parable about the Good Samaritan and seeing how not the holy people that we might think are what really holiness is, but those that reach out and care for the hurting. And as we see that, we understand the connection between God as loving. This Samaritan, who in many ways represents the love of God, is the person that goes, not as the religious person or the others, but cares for those that are hurting. And I really believe Jesus is saying to you and to me, if we're struggling with guilt, if we're struggling with fear, if we're struggling with being disillusioned by riches and comfort, if we're going through depression or even sin, God is going to reach out into your life and to bring the healing and the hope that you're looking for. If that ain't true, then all this thing that I'm trying to preach on television, all this concern that I have with sharing God's love really doesn't make sense. But it is true. God is seen as an image in that Good Samaritan, and he cares about you. Now, what's going on in your life? What's happening? Are you going through some real struggles in your family, in your work, in your heart, in your health? What is it? Can you believe that God loves you deeply and will stop and will go against all kind of traditions to give you love and care and direction and pick you up and take you and take care of you? Please, please let that message touch you. As the Good Samaritan cares, God cares for you and will never let you go. Now, as I said to you, the challenge of this parable is that we find that loving God, not just in church, although it's important that we go to church, not just in holy people, and it's important that we respect people with the cloth and all of that, but we also make sure that we hold up the great people that serve those that are hurting. Now, I've got some real heroes in my own life, and some of them are saints, and some of them are blesseds. They've gone the road of life, and they've struggled a lot, but they've allowed their life to mirror that love of God as they reach out to the poor and the hurting. Now, there's a man by the name of Peter Claver. He was a Spaniard. He was a priest. He lived way back in the 1600s. But he was able to touch a very, very beautiful aspect of this God loving other people. He was sent from Spain to Latin America, and he was sent to a place on the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico, to a town called Cartagena. Now, this town turned out to be the place where, after slaves had been captured and were put on ships, they were brought to the New World, and one of the first ports that they were put to was this Cartagena in Colombia, where Peter Claver was. Well, he's serving as a priest, he's doing his job, working out and saying Mass and helping people, and all of a sudden, he's looking out and he's seeing these ships come. Now, you and I have we know the story of what was involved with picking up the slaves and bringing them from Africa to the New World. They were stuffed in the bowels of ships in a very, very terrible, terrible way. Well, get this. This man, a dignified man from Spain, decided that every time a ship came and it anchored in the port of Cartagena, he would get a boat captain, and they would go out and he'd bring food and he'd bring medicine, and he would care for the slaves. And remember, they were tied down or they were chained down in these ships, unable to get out, and maybe being in those ships for like 3 months. And then suddenly this man comes, and they didn't know what it was, and all he did was offer love, gently talking with them, speaking with them with his hands, and offering them bread, offering them a little bit of medicine to take care of some of their wounds, but trying as best he could in a terribly, terribly complex social situation to bring the deep love and the care of Jesus to these people. I tell you that example, and get this man, Peter Claver, did this for 40 years. For 40 years, he gave his life to these lost souls in the bowels of ship who were going to be taken out, men and women, and sold with great indignity. And he brought them love and care. I don't know about you, but that says this parable, this encountering God in caring for the poor, can be seen even today. And I think of that example of Peter Claver. One of my pride points of being a priest in my life was several years ago, before Mother Teresa passed away, I was able to go to India, and I was able to spend, get this, 3 days with Mother Teresa. The first time I met her was in a town in Mumbai in India, and I was very touched by her. And then later on, I was able to go to Calcutta and be able to say Mass for Mother Teresa, and also to experience the overpowering love and care of what she and her sisters did for the people that were dying on the streets or dead on the streets. They would pick them up, bring them in, and give them great love. Well, you know these stories, and you know this is the call, that we see these examples and we understand that God is loving as we find people who pick up this story of the Good Samaritan and reach out with great love to people who are hurting. So please, I'm asking you, would you listen to the message of the Good Samaritan? Would you listen to the message of the call to love? Would you listen to the message of finding God, certainly in church? No, please, again, I'm not knocking church, or I'm not knocking saying the rosary, I'm not knocking reading the Bible. But there seems to be a real call of Jesus of saying, remember, if you really want to encounter my Father, if you want to know God, look at the people around you that are hurting, the people that are poor, the people that are sick, the people that are forgotten, and allow my love to be made real in their life. Oh, so this is what we've got to do, isn't it? We've got to open our eyes to, maybe as we're walking to work or walking from the bus, to find someone that's homeless. And maybe this is really where we're going to be able to find God. Maybe it's making time to go to a nursing home. And maybe it's just caring for someone who's very close in our family, who maybe is a teenager or is a person who seems to have lost their way in life, to spend time with them and care about them and love them. Please, allow the force of this to be very, very effective in your life. Stay tuned. We're going to come back in just a moment. I have written a new book for you, and it has an impossible title: 5 Seconds a Day to a Successful Marriage. Impossible, huh? No. This can be a key to bringing new life if you're madly in love with your partner. But maybe you've reached a plateau and things aren't growing the way they should. Maybe even you're separated and things seem hopeless. I want to tell you that with this book and with the 5 seconds of challenge, your marriage can turn into a great, great experience of love and power. Please, look right on the screen. There's where you can get in touch with us, and you can order this book for only $8 or more if you can. I want to send this to you, and I want to allow your marriage to come to new life and new hope. Remember, 5 seconds a day to a successful marriage. Do it. I've tried to say to you today a very important fact, that if God in your life has somehow moved away because of perhaps things that have happened that have made you angry with God, or maybe even wanting to reject God, and the whole concept of saying, oh, God is love, doesn't seem very reasonable to you, I'm trying to say to you as best I can, using this story of Jesus, that God is loving. And just as that Samaritan stopped and cared for that poor dying man, God is caring for us even when we're dying, whether through old age or whether through sin or whether through separation and confusion. God loves us, and God is caring for us. And may the example of people that are hurting and the challenge of this story call you to care for people that are hurting. Yeah. One of the joys of this ministry is we got a lot of hurting people who have reached out to us and asked for prayer. Now, one of the really important ways of getting in touch with this is a new part of our ministry, and it's with the iPhone. You've heard of the iPhone. I give a daily message on the iPhone that you can tune into. You go to, the address is iGod Today. Just go to that and you get the app. For a very reasonable price, you can be able to share with me the love of God, and you can share some of your concerns and needs. As we reach out and we listen to that Samaritan's example of really loving the poor, we remember Kara in Ohio, praying very much because of a psychological test that's coming up. Amy in California. She's looking for safe travel in her moving around. We go all the way to Maryland, and here's Mary. She has great pain in her back and in her head. Kathy in Maryland, looking for financial assistance, and how many of us are doing that? Lord, all of these people, they need to experience your love. Do that now. May Jesus' love for you always make you smile.
Without his tears, there is no comfort. Without his death, there is no life.
Without his blood, there is no pardon. Without his cross, there is no crown. Without his shame, there is no glory. Without his grief, there is no joy. Without his stripes, there is no healing. Without his cross, there is no crown. Lamb of God, you bring salvation, and with your grace our hearts are sealed. Lord, with your tears of love you bathe our sorrows. In your eyes we stand revealed. Without his tears, there is no comfort. Without his death,